Okay. Zayin. Ma'ata yes lahavim b'pchinas hamalchus atzilus nikoel madibur pchinas rochel almadis galya ima tata. Vehi heyachreina Shem Havaya ki yadua b'inyan ki ima bita the Heyila the Bino Zipas Hey Gvurs Manatzpach Lebarta Pchinas Hey Matzos Apeh the Dibur on the canal. The Nikra Mama Pasuach Mo Vayemer Lakim Moish Nemar Bidvar Hashem Shamayim Hulu Balzeh Amar Malchusa Bakol Hulu Yadua V'hine Yadua B'inyan Anesira Shadu Partufin Hayu V'hainu Shapinas HaMalchus Hay Siflulu Pinas HaChorayim Dezok Moish Nemar Etzem HaTzomei Hulu Ki Meish Lukach Hazoi V'achar Anesira Nivnes HaMalchus V'binyan Partzuf V'pnei Azman Ba'eres V'kelim Moish Nemar V'yivin Hashem Elokim Et HaTzelach Hulu Uviru Advorim Yadua B'Zoyar V'Etz Chaim B'Kama Duchte HaMalchus Nikres Asiris Nilkacha Masira de Kol Eshes Spirus Dezah. The Hainu Pinas Malchus to Kol Spirus Dezah. Mama Pinas Malchus the Chochma Dezah. Nimsha Pinas Chochma de Malchus. When Pinas Malchus the Chesed Dezah. Nimsha Chesed de Malchus. Fulu. While Derech Zeh Nivnu Kol Eshes Spirus de Malchus. Ubir Bechinas Malchus, the test Spirus Dezah, Yadua Shahu, Bechinas Haidgalu Shal Kol Midos Shira, Sheba Bechinas Gilu Liyesh V'Dover Ma B'Metzias Nikeres. Ma Midas Ava, Chesed, yeah. Sheba Begilu Yesh, Chilu, Hulu. That's the Malchus of it. In other words, when it becomes a felt thing in a thought of Oisius, that means that you know what it is that you're feeling. V'hine pinas haidgalus hazos ha'atzmius nikras selam b'tzura ha'atzmis k'tzira ha'atzmi d'choisam u'kai gavna. They can... What is this?
Fear.
We can fear upon him Atman, Polo.
Atzma.
Yeah, over here, I don't know, it's like matushtash a little bit. There's something wrong with the print. So, fear upon him Atmai. V'hainu Pinas Akeli Dezah Shal Ze Amar Akelim Dezah Shal Ze Amar Iver Gamoy Chad. Shahu ki inyan agvul b'koyach moshe v'or l'mayla b'eit toftes. It's not the actual gvul. The kalim of Zoh is not an actual gvul, but a powerful gvul. Aval pinas mus, so that's ketalmenu. And pinas mus benukva dezoh. Shenikrat mus v'odavaya dezoh. Inyan gedua b'inyan nase adam b'talmenu kid musenu. To tell them the Kura it moves the Nukva. Hulu, Vahaino Inyan Advin it Galifu Hulu. Shahu Pinas Hitgalus, Litgalus, Vaisius Achaisa Manechkak Bishava Kai Gavna. In other words, that the Aisius of the Malchus of the Sphira becomes the Sphira of Malchus of that. Like you said, that Malchus of Chesed becomes Chesed of Malchus. And this is that the Oasis is Galifu, meaning from the Choisam, that the Choisam sticks out and it presses in a Galifu into the next level.
Right.
And that it means the Talmeno means the original, like the Tfus, and Kidmusenu is the letter that it prints. It's exactly the Mus of the original thing. But it's like only admus. In other words, it's like a person, like the Rebbe. The Rebbe had his form, was his telem, right?
Right.
And then when you see the Rebbe's video, that's not him really. It's not his telem.
Right.
It's admus. And yet the admus is exactly like the telem.
Right.
Not only that, I mean, especially with the video, it talks and everything, and it's mamish. It's almost like your mamish seeing the Rebbe. But it's admus.
Right.
And the same thing, like right now, I'm talking. The voice that's coming out from me, that's like even though by me it's like we're saying that the speech is like a dmus that's only coming out from my inner midos, right?
Right.
But as far as the voice itself, we're not talking as far as in relation to the midos. As far as the voice itself, it has its own telem, its own form, like.
Right.
And basically, it gets gleefed out through the telephone in whatever ways it works. And then over there, like you're hearing me right now. You're really not hearing me at all.
Right.
What you're hearing is a reconstruction. Admus. My voice does not carry all the way to Los Angeles.
Right.
What you are hearing is the voice gets turned into another kind of letter, which is basically electrical impulses, and then the electrical impulses on your phone set get turned back from electricity into again airwaves from electric waves back to airwaves. So it's admus of admus almost. Like admus of admus of admus, because my original voice over here is really admus of what the telem is in the emotion and the seichel.
Right.
So basically that's the inyan that the malchus is called admus. But nonetheless, it makes no difference. In other words, the fact that you're only hearing admus on your side makes no difference. For all intents and purposes, you might as well be hearing my voice.
Right.
It doesn't. It makes absolutely no difference. It's as if you're actually hearing my actual voice. Like the chaysam gets pressed into the what do you call it? The wax,
Right.
The kach pinas is galus ha'atzmus shebamida shebalev shema bepinas is galus yesh bedibur behei meitzes hapeh nasa bepinas yesh nivdal b'pnei atzma. Then it becomes a yesh nivdal b'pnei atzma, and that's why it can travel over to Los Angeles while I'm still here. And that's why also the malchus of writing can travel over time, basically, that the Rebbe's letters traveled over to us. It became like a yesh b'pnei atzma, like this book. The pinat yesh nivdal b'pnei atzma, shenikra yesh to yesh. It's a something of a something. In other words, when the Rebbe brought it down into an actual thought inside of himself, where it was all the way to the external kalim of Zah and Malchus of the spheres of Zah, there was already a yesh over there. That's the telem. In other words, what he said is that the Malchus of the spheros of Zoh is where it becomes a Yesh.
Right.
And then where the Malchus becomes a binyan by itself, it's called a Yesh of a Yesh. Moshe Bor Mokamach Barichus, it's more Bechinas Chochma Shebechesed, Shebelev Abba Begilui Be'evim Mugbal. Hare Adayin Achuz Mitzached Be'etzim HaChochma V'Chesed Kulu. Aval Gilui Shlo B'Dibur Shezeo B'chinas Maimer Yehi Oyer Umau Sova Nivdol B'Fnei Asmo. That's already a totally separate thing. The whole B'chinas Chochma Shebechesed the Malchus. The Nimshach and Tzilan Malchus the Chochma the Chesed. The Bezah, they're frat. So in other words, not only the thing that Malchus of Chesed becomes Chesed of Malchus, but Malchus of Chochma Shebechesed becomes Chochma Shebechesed of Malchus. And so on. V'kach who call binyan proteus the essence spheres of Malchus. And it's like that in all the different proteins. Whether of the first order of spheros or the second order or the third order, whatever, from the Malchus of the upper becomes the sphera of the Malchus. No, from the Malchus of the sphera becomes the sphera of the Malchus. And from the Malchus of the sphere comes the sphere of the Malchus. Like over here, from the Malchus of Chochma of Chesed becomes Chochma of Chesed of Malchus. And it's really actually doesn't need much of an explanation. Basically, that from the expression of love becomes the love within the speech.
Right.
From the emotion of love, when he has an emotion of love, and he wants to express it. From that comes the emotion of love within the speech.
Right.
And the same thing like the emotion of hate or anger. Like when he says, "You, what did you do?" Where does that come from? It comes from the fact that he was angry. And not just he was angry, but he wanted to express that anger.
Right.
Same thing with the love. It's not just that he loved a person. He wanted to express it. The love was like overflowing to the point, in other words, within the emotion, let's say the emotion of anger, it went from the inner emotion, which is its Chabad, the reason for the anger, through the Chagas, which is the feeling of the anger, through the Nehir, which is the pilot of the anger, all the way to the point that it had the Malchus, that the anger was already a Yesh, that he wanted to express. It was trying to come out of him now. And that Malchus of the anger became the anger that you hear within the speech. And within the speech
Right.
you hear that the guy's angry. Both in the voice and in the words. You hear that the guy is angry, both in the voice and in the words. And same thing like in Chochmah. When the Chochmah or the Bina want to express themselves, so then in the speech, you say, wow, that was a really great, smart speech that you made. And where did that come from? So you say it came, the Chochmah of the Malchus came from the Malchus of the Chochmah. And it's basically a simple thing to, it doesn't need much of an explanation more than this, basically. And that's the way in the whole binyan pratim, that's the sphere of the Malchus, bars the kelim, but parts of it ne'atzmi. Follow. V'koydem on a sira, how you do partufin. Shekmo achorayim, shenigra achar apotnim, bli maus of ne'atzmi. כך בבחינת אחריים, דכל ספירה היה נקרא בחינת התגלוס המלכות. כי יש בכלל מסיים חולו. In other words, within each sphere, there's also included the fact that the sphere wants to express itself and be a something. It's automatically included. כמו שמבואר במקום אחר, בבחינה בפרוטים עניין, אחר ואחר ואחר בפונים. Follow. There's apparently two inyanim of how it's like the tzaddik. You know, did you ever see the two tzaddiks? There's two ways to write a tzaddik. One is achar ba'achar and one is achar b'panim. In other words, the face of the woman in the back, achar ba'achar means that he's facing forward and she's facing back.
Right.
Achar b'panim means she's also facing forward, looking at his back.
Right.
She doesn't see anything but like a brick wall, and you know, like you have those tenements where you open the window and there's a brick wall there.
Right.
So it is, and the thing is, like he's saying, achar b'panim, and then there's another manda amar, zanav haya,
right,
the tail.
Yeah.
Which also is like not necessarily; these are not necessarily exclusive things. That it was a tail, that the malchus is the tail of each sphere.
Right.
ומתחילה היא נקודת החסידות, זה רמתם. Follow. כמו שנאמר, ותיפול לפני רגלה. Like a chirik under a yud, you know. Because ותיפול of לפני רגלה, this is by Esther and Achashverosh, you know. כמו שנאמר, בזוהר על פסוק עשה, דברו אז אירס גרמה כנקודה. She made herself small like an akuda.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing was, as Iris Kinakuda means that in order to talk properly, you first of all have to bottle out the talk and go into the thinking. And that's, you know, like when somebody wants to make a speech. So, the thing is, you could have somebody get up and spontaneously make a speech, but that's really only if he already knows the subject matter already very, very well. So that means really it already happened earlier. That's why you can make a speech right now because you already did this business of really going into it, basically going into the Bina.
Right.
In other words, that she has to fall under his feet, and it has to be like an akuda under the yud, that he has to go into, in order to speak, he has to not speak.
Right.
And that's the thing, what they say, that a Meshuggah says what he thinks, and a wise person thinks what he says.
Right.
In other words, somebody who just immediately says everything, where the speech doesn't become an akuda, it ends up just baloney and babble.
Right.
It's not. It doesn't have a good speech. There's no binyan. There's no binyan. The whole thing in order to have a proper binyan of malchus, the malchus has to make itself small. First of all. In other words, it has to become actually a nothing. In other words, he has to basically sit there without speaking.
Right.
In order to finally speak, he has to sit there without speaking. And this is the thing of, like, you know, like these people that you really want to always, you know, the people everybody wants to avoid.
Yeah. What?
It's usually because they just want to speak all the time.
Right.
And they don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
And finally, you just want to get away from me. I mean, just how do I get rid of this person? You know.
Right.
You know, the right away they want to speak. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the person like that right away wants to speak, nobody wants. Finally, nobody wants to listen to. What does it mean? What does it mean? Nobody wants to listen to? It means that the whole purpose of the speech is not fulfilled.
Right.
Because the whole purpose of the speech, Malchus, that's why it's called Malchus, is they should listen to you.
Right.
That's the whole Indian of Malchus. Means if he's a melech, they have to listen to him. And the whole Indian of speech, well, what does it mean, speech? You don't want to just talk. You want people to listen to you. And the craziest type of person is a person who walks around the street just talking to himself.
Right.
He just wants to talk so much he doesn't even care if anybody's listening to him anymore. He just needs to talk. And he just walks around talking.
Right.
And there's nobody listening. And the reason it happens is because he doesn't stop the talking in order to think.
Right.
And the more he stops the talking in order to think, so therefore it's a wiser and wiser person. That, in other words, it's like people, and then people want to listen to him because they know that what he's going to say is Masudar according to a proper thought. Like that thing
right.
They used to have an advertisement. When E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens.
Right. Alan Greenspan.
Alan Greenspan, not Alan Greenspan. It used to be an advertisement.
Yeah, I know, but when Alan Greenspan speaks, everybody listens.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about in the advertisement, what they meant was, why do they listen? Because he sat there and figured it out, and he's going to give you good advice.
Right.
That's why they're going to listen. So what does it mean he's giving you good advice and everybody's listening? It means that he actually, before he talked, he thought.
Right.
He analyzed this whole situation. So in other words, he didn't talk. And that's the strange thing about Dibur, that the beginning of Dibur is Dafka not to talk.
Right.
It has to start Dafka by becoming a nothing. Where are we here?
Zirat Garma.
Zirat Garma. It has to make itself small like an akuda. That means like a total nothing. Kulu. Ad hey kimilukadmin. Till it becomes a hay just like the hay that was before, like the bina.
Right.
It has to become an akuda and let the thing go up to the upper hay until it becomes a hay just like the hay from before. That the lower hay becomes like the upper hay, and then everybody will listen. Shachar kach nivnet bepartzu b'tchinas artilus ad shenases b'tchinas ponim v'ponim, till it becomes ponim v'ponim, because really now she is farther in than he is, because she is now on the level of Bina, which is where he was looking to. That's why it's ponim v'ponim. Right? In other words, where is the Zohar looking? The Zohar is looking inside. The Zohar is looking towards the Bina. And now the Malchus, since it became Azirus Karmei, now it becomes on Kimil Kadmin like the upper hay. And then it becomes Panim Panim. Kedimian Mius HaYareach and Milo Yareach, like the moon that gets empty and full. וזהו עיקר עניין בניין המלכות, שהוא למעלה מבניין המלכות בפרס וביאה. This is a higher thing. This is the Inyan of the Binyan of Malchus and Atzilus, which is higher than the Binyan of Malchus, the parts of the Biyah. Shenistar kol partzufa shebchinas Atzilus, ad bchinas Malchus, the Malchus shebekia Masach, v'naset b'bchinas parts of the Bria, k'mo sheitbarach ulu v'dala mevin. In other words, there's another thing. There's one of the things is that she has to Aziras Garme in Atzilus itself, in order to have a full binyan of Malchus, like in terms of speech, like we said, that the guy's going to write the speech. That means he has to build up the whole speech till the speech is all masudar on the tip of his tongue.
Right.
But he didn't say it yet. But he has the whole speech totally ready to say, perfectly. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
But he didn't say it yet. It didn't go through the masaf yet. It didn't go to the outside yet. To the biyah is alma de pruda.
Right.
In other words, where you're talking ready to somebody else.
Right.
Chassidus means it's all still inside of himself. In other words, the whole speech is all arranged and all ready to go, but he didn't say it yet. So that's one inyan of binyan malchus. Then there's another inyan of binyan of malchus that in order to do that, basically what has to be done is that the whole inner malchus has to disappear and leave over only the malchus of malchus, the letters.
Right.
And that's the thing, that basically why he has to go over the speech almost in a way of memorizing it so that it's, what do you call that, shagur al-l'shaynai.
Right.
Not so much the midos of it, but the fact
Go ahead. Backtrack a little bit.
Yeah. So, in other words, that the binyan of malchus in Atzilus is that he built the whole speech inside of himself. But then, even after he built the whole speech inside of himself, in other words, he has a written speech.
Yeah.
And not just a written speech. In other words, he has the speech written inside of him.
Right.
But even then, he's still not really ready to mamish give the speech perfectly. Why? Because it's all its 10 spheros. And what he has to do now is have the binyan of malchus with 10 spheros.
Right.
So that he has to stand there and practice. You know how they practice?
Yeah.
Like in front of a mirror, or the guy tells his wife, "Here, listen to me," and then he practices.
Yeah, he goes over the whole speech, what he's going to say.
Yeah, but not just what he's going to say. He goes over, like, what part he's going to emphasize.
Right.
And what part he'll talk low. And he stands in front of the mirror and watches how he's going to make a sweep with his hands. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And this is after the speech is already, there's a full binyan of malchus already before he does this.
Right.
And what this is the binyan of malchus, also a 10 spheros, so that in the malchus of malchus, in other words, he knows what emotion, he already knows in the terms of the binyan of malchus with 10 spheros, he knows the emotion that he wants to get out in his speech.
Right.
He knows that this is a speech of chesed, or he wants to, like if he's a rabble-rouser, he knows that what he wants is to get everybody angry.
Right.
Or he wants to get everybody to feel kind and merciful so that they'll give money to the poor orphans with the patches in their yarmulkes.
Right.
So he knows the emotions already. It's already, the malchus is already a binyan. But even after that, he still has to practice the speech in front of the mirror. And what's he doing? Over here, he wants to make sure that the spheros of malchus transfer properly to the spheros of malchus. And over here, it's the same thing. It's the same inyan. That from the malchus of the sphera comes the sphera of the malchus. What does that mean? It means that from Malchus of Chesed of Malchus comes Chesed of Malchus of Malchus. Right?
Yeah.
You know what that means, right? That in the sphere of Malchus, there's Chesed of Malchus. And that also has a Malchus. So Malchus of Chesed of Malchus, he has to transfer that. In other words, he has the built-up speech, which in the built-up speech is Chesed of Malchus. In other words, the fact that he wants to convey a feeling of love. Or Gvura of Malchus, that he wants to convey a feeling of anger and hatred. Or Rachamim of Malchus, that he wants to convey a feeling of Tiferes, of mercy, like compassion.
Right.
And within that, there's the feeling that he wants to actually convey it into the actual letters of when he's actually going to speak.
Right.
Properly. That when he speaks, it should be conveyed. And this is the binyan of Malchus, how it's going to go through to be Keser of Bria. In other words, when he speaks to his audience, that he should get the desired effect in their Tainug and Ratzon.
Right.
And motivate them properly how he wants to motivate them. Like to motivate them to give money. Or motivate them to storm the Bastille. Or whatever.
Right.
Or motivate the other person to love him back. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a separate binyan. That's a binyan of Malchus. And that's, so he's saying there's two inyanim here. One is the inyan of the binyan of Malchus itself. Malchus itself in Atzilus. And then there's Nistar Kol Patzuf Shebchinas Atzilus, Ad Chinas Malchus of Malchus, Shebokea Masach, and then Malchus of Malchus Nases B'chinas Patzuf V'Bria. Meaning that now Malchus of Malchus has to have 10 spheros. And that's what he's practicing in his speech, right?
Right.
That when he actually stands and the actual speech comes out of his mouth, outside of himself, and it's Bokeh the Masach, it should be the partuf that he wanted. Otherwise, what could happen, and this is where a sort of a toyu can happen, that he wanted to convey a certain feeling, and because he didn't practice the speech properly, it's not conveyed properly. He's not a good speaker. And also another thing is he wants to make sure that people will listen to him. And that's when they'll listen to him. If the emotions, they say, wow, what a speaker,
Right.
And then also that he will do whatever it is, like the rabble rousing. That they'll listen to him in terms of listening to him and doing, that's the inyan of Malchus. He wants to be the king.
Right.
So therefore, that if he wants to convey a feeling of rabble rousing, he wants that people should listen to him and storm the Bastille. And then, that's what he's saying. It is Malchus of Malchus, Shabakei Masach, and then that becomes a peanut part of Bebria. In other words, in order to create this mood or seichel or whatever, same thing with a seichel, he might want to convey a certain seichel to a class.
Right.
So, in order to, this is a bria. He's making a bria chadasha of a mood over there. He wants to, in other words, like what does he say that? Wow, then when this speaker creates such a mood.
Right.
And that's the engine of becomes a part of Bria. Moshe Baruch Hu, and this will be discussed in later chapters, full of Adala Maven. והנה, זהו באמת עניין דל שבוסי דאחד, and this is the real Indian of Dal Shabbosi De'echad. You say, what do you mean this is the Indian of Dal Shabbosi De'echad? This is the real Indian of Dal Shabbosi De'echad. Didn't you just tell us before, you're telling us Dal Shabbosi De'echad was even before the Tzimtzum. Then you're telling us Dal Shabbosi De'echad over here and over there, and then you're telling us that Dal Shabbosi De'echad is Tvuna. Now you're saying this is the real Indian of Dal Shabbosi De'echad. So, Pinas Gadlu Partsuf Nukva Dezah, the Pinas Atzilus Dafka, V'moichen Amidus Oris V'kelus. So he's saying that's what's the Dal Shabbosi. The Dal Shabbosi is the Malchus, how it is in Atzilus. And the little Dal is how the Malchus is Bokia the Masa. Mosh Nema Vayiven Hashem Lokim et Atzela Shahu Avod Atzilus the Bonula. She was built by Chochmah and Bina.
Right.
That even though she was built according to the Midos of Zah, but that's where they took her from. In other words, like it says that what is it? It says Hashem Elokim, right?
Right.
How does it say? Do you remember the pasuk?
Which pasuk are you thinking?
Vayiven Hashem Elokim et Atzela, no? It's over here somewhere. He says he quotes it here someplace. Yeah, Vayiven Hashem Elokim et Atzela. Hashem is Chochmah, Elokim is Bina. In other words, she's built out of the Tzela.
Right.
That's the material. But she's built by Hashem Elokim.
Right.
Even though the material is from Malchus of Zoh, but it's built from higher than Malchus of Zoh. By Chochmah and Bina.
Right.
And they built her, and then they tell her, V'amrula zili natiri besich. Go and take care of your house. Leah is Yisroel b'yachulu. To be a head for the foxes. They build her up, and then they say, now go out and be the head for Biyah. The speech, to go out. In other words, the Seichel builds up the speech out of the Midos, out of the Malchus of Zoh, and then tells her, now go out, go outside.
Right.
And be the head for the Biyah. Follow. Ki yadua b'inyan be'erech afro asarim. This is apparently some Indian in Kabbalah that on this pasuk. והעניין הוא לבחינת דיבור שמחשבה הנ"ל, שזהו דל שבוסי, נעשה מחשבה שבדיבור העליון דזו, מבחינת עשר ספירות ארז וכלים, שהוא ממלכוס לתת ספירות דזו כנ"ל. That means it's coming out, the Malchus, the meaning of Malchus is coming from the Malchus of the Tetzirus of Zoh. V'hainu Ach, Dalit. 9. Ach is 9. Dalit. From the 9 comes the Malchus. Moshe v'or b'mokamacha b'arichus. Moshe nemer v'yeh adam l'nefesh chaya ruach v'malala. But the Adam became a speaking spirit. Shahu Dvar Melech Shilton. And that's what it says, that the word of the king is the rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, that the word of the king is the rule. What does it mean the word of the king is the rule? That the rule of the king comes dafka through his words. So that if a king thinks something, he cannot complain if it's not done. If he says something and you don't do it, then it's a death penalty.
Right.
It's a shilton. That's the shilton of the melech. Like also, this is also, I mean, a lot of these things, by the way, this, we're coming up to Purim, and you see the whole Indian of the Megillah, how deep the Megillah is.
Right.
the Megillah says all these things, you think it's just talking a story, but all of these things that she fell at his feet and all this business, and also the thing at Dvar Melech Shilton that he said that a thing, what does he say? That the thing that came out from the king and was sealed with the tabas of the king can't go back.
Right.
Has to be done. And all of these inyanim of Malchus over there, you know, as a matter of fact, the whole half of Shaar HaYichud is on the inyanim of Purim. The second half is about Purim. The sus, you know, the sus of the king and the lavush of the king, you know, and all of these things that you say, like you think, what's, you know, it's a wonderful kiddie story. Yeah, he told them to put Mordechai on the horse, that the king rode on this horse, and put on him the clothes that the king clothes, and the king's crown, and stuff like that. And really, it's all deep stuff, you know, Megillus, like it's called Megillus Esther.
Right. Nistar.
Nistar, I mean, the Giloy of the Nistar. Dvar Melech Shilton, biyud my Morris, vayomer Elokim, that when he said, then it had to become done. Yadua, Pinas Kesher, the Malchus Atzilus, he Pinas Koach HaDibur, Kodem shemitpashel l'daber b'Pinas Seichel u'midot shebedibur. True test here is the Malchus. That's the actual, like the holy power of speaking before he even thinks of speaking, like. V'hainu inyan la'olam Hashem dvarcha nitzav v'shamayim b'chinat zah. V'hainu pinas koach hadibur shedabuk b'chazeh dezah tamid chulu. In other words, in the chazeh, the koach hadibur is there even when you don't speak. K'mo shavor be'etz chayim. V'vor b'makam acher. V'itpashtus ha-malchus, v'itpashtus ha-malchus, malbeshes l'tanhi dezah. That's why it's called Dalit. Shehu Pinas Dalit. Now, what does this mean? Tanhi dezah. That it doesn't actually it's not really malbish, the actual the etzem hamidos is its chesed and gvura. And then the tiferes is also called like the pyrus, you know.
Right.
And it's also called like mercy means the connection with the other guy. In other words, the fact that he wants to give it over to the other guy is like an Indian already you have to have a connection with the other guy. And that's where it comes from. Not only that, the malchus can only be malbish to hachra'ah, not the original decision between chesed and gvura. So
right.
The basically it's malbish on nehi. Nehi, we understand how it's malbish on nehi because nehi is not the etzam midos, it's the pilus midos, and that's why it's malbish. But the tiferes is the hard part of this. Where does the tiferes come in? Why is it tanhi and not just nehi?
Right.
And the thing is that it does carry forth the actual etzem hamidos, but not how they actually are, but only the hachra'ah, the final hachra'ah of it.
Right.
Not the original hataya between chesed and gvura, where the chesed is full and the gvura is full, but only after they get mixed up. So it's tanhi. And that's why it's called dalit, because it's malbish, the four midos. Shehu b'chinas dalit. V'malchus nikra dal, and it's also called dal because she's small, low. poor. In other words, she has nothing of her own. She has to, like a poor person, has to beg for everything. She has to get stuff from other people, you know?
Right.
The shoyrish, pchinas ha-malchus mechasodim dezoh, but however, the shoyrish of the binyan ha-malchus is from the chesed of zoh. The Kmoshe Nemar, in other words, the Indian of Malchus comes after from Chesed, which Chesed is the Indian of Hitpashtus. And that's why you see that it's Dafka when he's happy and loving, that's when he wants to talk. When he's angry, usually he doesn't want to talk. Like, you know, when you go to your wife and you say, what is it? Nothing.
Right.
Well, don't you want to talk about it? No. You know.
Yeah.
So when somebody doesn't want to talk about it, means they're angry.
Right.
So you see, it's Dafka when somebody's loving and kind, so they want to, then they're in an expansive mood, and then they want to talk. So you see that even the binyan of Malchus, so you say, what do you mean? I thought, well, didn't we say that the binyan of Malchus was from Chochmah and Bina?
Right.
So yeah, that's who actually builds it. And the materials come from Malchus of the 9 spheros.
Right.
But now he's saying the Shoirish of the binyan of Malchus comes from, and that's what you see, that's when he wants to talk. That's when from the Chassidus.
Right.
The Zok, Moshe Nemar, Behuchan, Bechesed Kisai, the Kisai, the Malchus is Muchan, Davka, and Chesed. The Ktiv, Ashrei, Maskil, El Dal. And the Chesed, Chas, Dalet. He has mercy. Chesed means he's Chas on the poor person. That's what means Chesed. The Malchus lately megamar klum, it has nothing from itself. Rak mashim kabel mizokanal, only whatever it receives from Zoh only. The Inyan is galus, that it's a revelation of a revelation. Hulu, kamosh alavon shem kabel meira shemesh. Kamosh nema bezohar, the sihara leis lamigar machulu, that the moon has no light of its own. Masha Enken, Kazun, Hayu Shavim Kamosan, Kmosha Hayu Koidem Mute Areach Nikra Shneme Eris Agdoilim. So it's not like that when they were equal. They can la'atid lova dechti Bahaya Oyer Lavana Chulu. Then the speech will be just as big as the thought, and this is when he becomes a Talmud Chacham, that he learns. But his girsa, it's after the talking of Torah. And then it becomes even where it's even higher. Yes, Beis Madregas Gamabina Nukva. Ha'echad Betchinas Atzilus Shehi Inyan and Sirachulu V'abet Mashanas Reish Labiyah. That's what we talked about earlier. So there's 2 Inyan of the Binyan and Nukva. Make yourself less in order to go into Biyah. Then becomes, instead of becoming the tail of the lions, it becomes the head of the foxes. And in general, the Pchinas Atzilus Nikra Yoim, and Midas Laila, Pchinas HaMalchus, Shemistateres, Berosh Abriya. When it goes into Biyah, it's called Alma de Pruda, which is called the night. Moshit Bar B'Somach, B'Inyan Boshem, Kon Malchut, L'Olam Boed, Chulu, Acha Pchias HaMasa, Chulu, Badal. So the basic thing is he talked here about was the Nesira, and the Binyan of Malchus in Atzilus, and then the Binyan of Malchus for the Pchias HaMasa. Yeah, so we're going to go over chapter Mem Zayin now outside. So basically, the Indian of Malchus Datilus Rochel, Almadis Galia, and he explains that it's the last hay, and he also explains why the upper one is called hay and the lower one is called hay. amongst other reasons, the reason that he gives here is that the Bina lends the Hey Gvuros Menatzpach to Malchus. So that's a Hey and that's a Hey. And then he explains in the Nesira that the Malchus was included in Acharayim Dezah, and from the Malchus of each Sphira of Zoh came that Sphira of Malchus. And then he explains that the Malchus of the Sphiros of Zoh is basically the thing of how the Sphira comes into the Gilui, into a Yesh and Dover Ma, B'Metzius Nikeris, like, and this is like also the Indian upstairs where he says Ana Emloch, the Glif Glifu, where he actually says it, that's where it becomes an Gilui of a Yesh. So like in Malchus is also that Indian where it becomes a Gilui of a Yesh, you know. And the thing is that, for instance, a person, the Malchus, like, let's say, of the sphere of love or the sphere of anger, let's say, is where he says inside of himself, so to speak, that I love this thing, or I hate this, or I'm angry. And where it becomes, in other words, where it becomes a thing that it's a felt feeling. You know, in other words, sometimes the feeling is still vague before it becomes to the actual, and it's the malchus of the feeling that gives it its yeshus, where he's actually saying it to himself. And from that inner expression, like malchus means the expression, from that inner expression that brings the thing into a gilui of a yesh and dover ma, from that comes from the malchus of the sphere of Zoh comes that sphere of malchus. And then he explains the inyan of the Telem and Tzura, that the Telem is the Tzura Atzmis, and the Dmus, the Telem and the Tzura Atzmis, and the inyan of Telem and Dmus. The Telem is in the Zohar, and the Mus in the cave. In other words, in Zohar is called the Telem. The actual, it's still part of the actual form of the thing, whereas the speech is just a dmus of the thing. It's not the actual, in other words, the speech, even the fact that in the voice you hear the love or the anger, but that's not the etzem of the love or the anger. It's just a dmus of it. But then again, like we said, that the fact that it's a dmus makes no difference. It's the same, like, you know, when you see the Rebbe on a video. But there's one thing that we left out, is that actually it does make a difference. In some ways it doesn't make a difference. In some ways it does make a difference. The way where it makes a difference is that, like a Mona Lisa, the mousse of the Mona Lisa, you can have a mousse of the Mona Lisa that's exactly the same like the original, but it's not worth $100 million. Because it's not the original, no matter what you say. And even, like, you know, some of the, in the forgery business, some of the forgeries become actually also worth a lot, you know, because it's such good forgeries, you know. But it doesn't matter. And in other words, like, for instance, the American Constitution or the Bill of Rights, even though a copy that you have of it, it's only at Moose, it's nonetheless, the whole entire idea comes over just exactly the same like in the original one. But yet, if you would own the original American Bill of Rights, it would be worth millions and millions of dollars, you know, the actual original document. Whereas, you know, the dmus of it, a copy of it, is not really worth the same. So from one side, it's exactly the same, but from the other side, it's not. That's why it's only a dmus. And that's right. Also the inyan of, like, Atik, that, you know, Atik, which Atik comes Atik means it's a hetek from a copy of the Roshana Atzmi. You know, but and how the copy comes through is from Malchus. So from one side it's mamish the same thing is given over, but from the other side it's only a copy. It's not the original thing anymore. And by the way, this is also one of the inyanim of Malchus, is that the inyan of the letters and the dmus makes it into a way that it can be transferred from place to place without having the actual seichel. What does that mean? Like, for instance, this book, I can take this book and put it on a Xerox machine, and then it'll make another copy of it.
Right.
Right? You say, wow, that's a smart Xerox machine. The Xerox machine could actually make a copy of the Shaar HaYichud, a Chassidic Xerox machine, you know. How did he get so smart? He said, no, the Xerox machine has no idea what it says there. All it did is it copied over the shapes of the letters. That's it.
Right.
That's all it did. Or, you know, like when you feed the thing, like, you know, if I can take this book and take a JPG, you know, and feed it into the computer, a JPG file, or a GIF file, or whatever those files are, you know. Or, like, for instance, like what Shimon is going to do. He's going to take this shear that we're having right now, and he'll feed it into the computer, and then it gets fed up into the site, and I feed it down into my computer, or like what we're going to be doing with the seminars. You say, wow, the computers are smart. The computer is giving over the whole entire Shaar HaYichud.
Right.
Okay.
The computer will give over the whole Shaar HaYichud.
Right, the computer will give over the whole Shaar HaYichud. You say, wow, what a smart computer. But actually, the computer doesn't give over the Shaar HaYichud. All it is a program that basically copies over, piece by piece, the shapes. In other words, the shapes of the sounds. There's a shape, you know, the computer takes the sounds and copies over the shapes of the sound into the same like this telephone is doing. It copies it over, and it copies it over into a digital format. Right. And the digital format is the code. It just copies a code over, like basically white, black, black, white, white, black. And that's the same thing. Like you can give, let's say, a coded message to somebody.
Right.
And he can give it over to another guy, and he can, you know, and it's like, you know, like a guy can sing a song in Chinese, for instance.
Right.
You know, or like you can give a guy a message in a language that he doesn't know, and you have him memorize it piece by piece, so it's just that he'll know how to say it exactly right, and he'll be able to give it to the other guy on the other side. But he himself has no idea what he's saying.
Right.
He's just memorizing the sounds. You know, you know, basically the thing like people who sing English songs, you know, and they even get the Western accent and the whole bit.
Right.
But they don't know what they're saying, you know.
Right.
You know, so basically that's one of the inyanim in Malchus. It's dafka in Malchus. In other words, in the other places you can't do that. In the actual Chochmah and Bina, if you don't have the actual Chochmah and Bina, you can't transmit it. It can't be transmitted.
Right.
You have to actually have it. Same thing with the emotion. If you don't have the actual emotion, you cannot transmit the actual emotion. You know, that's why, The emotion can't go into the voice unless it's actually in the heart. And even actors, in order to really put the emotion into their acting, they can't, there's no way to actually do that. They have to somehow hype themselves up into actually having the emotion.
Right.
You know. But once it's in Malchus, it's a Dover Yesh Nifrat that can be copied over from place to place. As a matter of fact, that's how Atik gets copied over. It's from Malchus of Ein Sof.
Right.
That it can get copied over without actually knowing what it is that you're copying over. And it's also like a person that, a person could copy. You could have somebody sit down and copy like something that's written in Russian. Like I could give you a thing in Russian and you could sit down and copy the letters exactly over.
Right.
Without understanding a word of what it says there. Or like I could give you a French thing, and you could copy it over and make a copy for somebody, and you might not understand a word of what it says there, but nonetheless, the meaning will still go over. It makes no difference the fact that you don't know what it says.
Right.
The meaning is already coded in, and that's the whole thing, the encoding. As a matter of fact, that reminds me of something, an email that I never did answer you. I kept meaning to answer you, to Shimon, about the Torah codes.
Right.
The thing with the Torah code?
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me something
obviously, the thing that they're coming up with is a very, very much tip of the iceberg. They have no idea. Because it's actually, the Torah is literally the code. It's not just like what they think that it has like these things. It has the name of Saddam Hussein.
Right.
The reason there is
there himself.
Yeah, the reason there's a Saddam Hussein is because his encodement is in the Torah. If there was no encodement in the Torah, there could not be the DNA of Saddam Hussein, and he couldn't have been born.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason there's such a thing as gold is because the encodement of that element is in the Torah.
Right.
It's much, much deeper than what they think.
It's a blueprint for the whole universe. It's not just, it has little messages.
Yeah, but it's more than just a blueprint. It's more than just when they say it's the blueprint.
It's actually the source, not just the blueprint.
It's the source code.
Yeah.
In other words, like when you play Pac-Man, the only way you can play it is if you feed the code into the computer. Right. Like you take a disk and you put it in, and now I have Pac-Man on my computer. Why do you have Pac-Man and those little guys are running around and trying to eat you up? The reason you have it on there is because the source code is there making it happen.
Right.
And the Torah is literally the source code of the world, literally.
Right.
It's the letters of the Torah that actually keep the world in existence. It's the program.
Right.
It's not just that he looked in the fact that he looked in the Torah and created the world is the same like, in other words, that the computer looks. What the computer does is it looks at the source code and follows the directions and then transfers them over to the various peripherals of the computer.
Right.
And that's how all those people are running around on your screen doing things. The same thing like when, I just downloaded the seminars that Shimon uploaded.
Right.
The actual thing that's on my computer, there was no voice there. There's a code there, that's all it is.
Yeah.
And basically it's a binary code. It goes down finally to a binary code that's just 1001.
Right.
And the computer looks at that code and it reads it, and then it tells it, and now make this sound.
Yeah, I used to know how to program in binary.
Huh?
I used to know how to program in binary.
Uh-huh. And basically, so that's the codes. It's literally the codes. And the thing is that once it's in a code, the code can be transferred over without actually knowing what it means. And it's Daka Malchus that you can do that with.
Right.
And that's the whole Indian of Malchus. It's the code. It's the code of that thing that makes it into a separate somethingness. And this is like what he says here, the Dibur, the Maimer Yehi or Vayehi Oyer.
Right.
And then he says how from Malchus of Chesed becomes Chesed of Malchus. And he says not only from Malchus of Chesed becomes Chesed of Malchus, but from Malchus of Chochmah of Chesed becomes Chochmah of Chesed of Malchus, etc. Like the spheros of the spheros.
Right.
Right? And then he explains the inyan of the three inyanim before the Nesira. He doesn't explain it, he mentions them. Achar b'Ponim and a Zonov. Which basically, Achar b'Achar and a Zonov, I have an idea of what they're all about. Achar b'Ponim, I have a vague idea that it's a kabiyachol. One could say kabiyachol, but I'm not too sure. But one of the things I do know is that these things are not mutually exclusive. It's different ways of how the Malchus is in the different levels of Malchus. That even how Malchus is included in Zohar, it's different ways. One is it's only a Zonov. The other one, Achar b'Achar, means it's a little bit more than just a Zonov. It's a whole parts of looking backwards. And then there could be a thing that it could even be higher. In other words, the inner Malchus, the letters that the Chesed is coming from in the first place is also in Malchus. Like the thing with the shame that's after and the shame that's before.
Right.
But I'm not really sure what the Inyonim are. And then he explains it has to be first in a Kuda Tachat Yud, and she fell under his feet. And then he explains the two Inyonim of the Binyan of Malchus, which are really two Inyonim, is a Binyan of Malchus and a Binyan of Malchus of Malchus. Binyan of Malchus is the actual binyan of the speech itself, like is the marshal, and then Malchus of Malchus is after the speech is all together to build it how it's going to come out exactly in the letters. The actual binyan of the letters is going to come out that it says that that Chochmah and Bina built a Malchus, and they told her go out to be a Rosh Tabiyah, the Rosh Hashanah. And then he says that's the Dibur Shemachshava, it becomes Machshava Shebedibur, and that's Dalet Shabbatzi, Devar Melech Shilton. And then he explains the Indian why it's called a Dalet is Tanhi. There's Malbish to Tanhi of Zoh. So in other words, in the Dibur is Malubash Tanhi of Zoh. Then he again explains the Indian Dvar Melech Shilton, and there's the Malchus, how it's before the Dibur itself, which is Kesher Malchus, and then there's the Tezfiros of Malchus, and then there's actually the Malchus of Malchus, which is going to come through. And then he says that there could be, and how it's going to be after Mashiach comes again, where the Malchus is Shovim B'Kamotzim. How it was before, that in other words, that really the Malchus really, in other words, in a way, really preceded the Midos.
Right.
And that's the thing, that it has to, and he also explains like the moon, it gets less and more. And then he also says that in general that Atzilus is called a day and the Biyah is called a night. That's basically going over the chapter real fast, just to remember it good. Okay, so I have to go now. So have a good Shabbos.